Y ahora pasamos a la tercera de las ponencias, que corre en este caso a cargo de don Juan José Pérez Soba.
Don Juan José Pérez Soba, very well known from all of you, with his large bibliography in issues of family, and he's Director of Studies of the Master in Sciences of Marriage and Family in Juan Pablo II Institute, where he was trained. And he's going to talk about being mature in conjugal love, the key of the affection. Juan José, you have the floor. Thank you for this invitation. Thank you for the collaboration with this university in this task of teaching how to love. Don't swear, although you are my joy, I'm not happy for this pact. It's too sudden, too similar to something that is extinguished just before it has started. Good night, my love. The fruit of love matured by this converted at the end into a flower, a fantastic flower when we see each other. This is what Juliet says after the night with Romeo and Juliet. It's the most opposite to the romantic love that we can think about. She doesn't believe in the instant, and she believes in maturation. And she believes that one instant when we look for it in itself is already exhausted, and only when we believe in a love that promises something, the maturation is exactly the true love. It's not consumed at that moment, it's lived in the promise. This is what Shakespeare did know very well when he wrote Romeo and Juliet, and how in a deeply romantic experience of love, we have to know to interpret it in a different way in order to be able to discover the truth. And this is what he refers as love that have a such cultural understanding. We have to enter in how to understand this experience, as Michele Barbato has said, in order to really be able to teach how to love. I live in Rome, very close to the Tiber, and it's nice to go through the bridge, and close to the chains or in the bridge there are many locks. And this is what the fiancés leave, throwing the key to the river to imply that they want to love forever. So first of all, the love forever, that's what everybody wants. Even the young people today, they want a love that is lasting forever. Another thing is if they know how to achieve it. That is really the difference between a desire and a reality, because they don't have elements. There is not enough understanding in order to be able to experience it or live it. So how come it is possible to mature in love? When the love has a truth in it. The maturation is only to achieve an initial truth that was hidden. That is to mature. A fruit is not matured when it becomes ugly, when it hasn't carried out its function, but when it reaches a fullness that it didn't have before. That's why the comparison of Juliet with a flower and an unborn flower, well, is the logic of maturation. It's not to let time go by, but to see how the realities, the deeply human realities, are linked to a fullness that requires time to be expressed. So against that mode that culturally is imposed on us, that time is the greatest enemy of love. And talking about Juliet, we can say that time, what it does, is showing a full love when the bud becomes a flower. So the truth of love is the one that allows to give consistency to what otherwise is fragmented. The difficulty that we have at present is to overcome fragmentation, to live instants whose connection we don't understand in itself. Each one is asking for an absolute value, and thus we lose the guiding thread, and this is what leads us to a fullness. In order to better understand maturation, we are going to necessarily refer to two things, to a unit and a totality, and it's not the same thing. A unit that allows to find a link in different things. This is what is to fall in love. Love becomes a second thing when it impregnates different things and when it knows how to express itself in all of them. A love that is shown in mechanical manifestations even. There are fiancés that just compete as to how many kisses they give each other per minute. It's a clear example of epidermal love. Of course, to try to have a record doesn't give any meaning to that love, because it has lost its capacity of giving unity to different things in what really is an transcendental love value. This is the first thing that we have to discover so that love can become mature. The second one, all of this is pointing towards a totality. The totality doesn't come from outside. The totality is inside, in me. What the love does, giving unity to different things, that I can possess myself, that I can discover the totality of my being, and that what I see that love is promising is not simply a function nor a time, but it's the totality of my life. It's a totality. So maturity is when I really can possess myself in such a way that I can give me completely without any reservation. All this is necessary in order to be able to see the process of maturation. What is it? First of all, we can understand it. This is not given by a series of outer events or external events. It's not given by a series of recipes that we can achieve. It's, before anything else, an inner task. The formation of the individual who loves, the formation of this maturation. We become a lover because we have an experience and know how to live with this inner experience of the lover that allows to constitute it as a totality of feelings or senses, is what can then become mature. What is the great hurdle? The Pope Franciscus likes to say that the church is a campaign hospital, war hospital. It's probably here to have a virologist. The important thing is to know where the virus is. And otherwise, we take care of many patients, but they all die. What's the virus that prevents the love from getting mature? Certainly, it's the emotivism. To identify affect, reducing it to emotion, and living the truth of the emotion only through the intensity of the same. A double reductionism, and what it's going to do is really prevent the love to be mature. Why did emotivism arise? Why had it been possible to engulf our culture? No explanation until McIntyre wrote in 1981, where he invented that term of motivistic, I think he said. Of course, it exists since long, but the virus hadn't been detected. The reason is that we forget the affections, affections that come from a 17th century rationalism. The effects shouldn't be a reason for knowledge, and any logic, any knowledge that is somewhat logical should have to be disaffective, and then a romantic burst of affect, but irrational, that allowed any sort of thought as to the effect as such. There is short circuit that has allowed to have an empty space that the emotivism has occupied completely. What have we reached? What Bauman defines as affective illiteracy, the incapacity of knowing our effects in order to read what our effects said. This promise, this unity that we talked about, this is something that the effect contains, and either I know how to interpret it or not. I don't know what it is asking from me. And if I don't know to read my effects, I don't know how to write my story. I will not be able to give a unity to the story that is asking for these effects that are being built. Here is where we can understand how love, especially sexual love, in which that talks to man has its own grammar, as the unity of love is unique. It's a unity within the difference, so it's a unity that intentional and relevant. This grammar of love is based on two differences. The difference, sexual difference, so it is the unity between men and women that is indicating, and also the generational difference that is also defended by the prohibition of incest. These are the two basic languages of sexuality. Sexuality can have a meaning because there is a difference between sex, and this gives meaning to the difference, and difference of generations as well, that also gives a new meaning to its relevance. Or we understand that behind what exists in the gender theory, there is a denial of the sexual difference that is very much bound to a whole sexual abuse in intergenerations. Nobody thinks about talking about it, but from a merely sexual grammar point of view, we have to bear in mind. What is then the common point in which the emotivism can give rise to this affective illiteracy that denies the differences? Love that denies differences has a name, that is narcissism. Narcissism is to remove all differences from love, with the immediate consequence of the impossibility of recognizing oneself in this love, the lack of identity totally. Narcissus doesn't recognize himself as too beautiful, but he doesn't recognize himself as in what he sees, and he is confounded and thinks it's a beloved one. This lack of identity in Narcissus makes that love fail. Narcissism, what is it at present? How is it expressed? Fundamentally, in the same myth of Narcissus, is not understanding the origin, sees the image and doesn't wonder where it comes from. And on the other hand, not understanding the lesson. It's not a mere drive, but really it's the totality that I'm giving. So behind and the knowledge of narcissism, we have the virtues that are those that support chastity, apart from the embarrassment that is bound to this identity, is the reverence, recognizing the other as different but with dignity. Recognize the other as different in what really is a gift for me, because it's only in that way that love in that difference is seen as a veneration, we can understand that at the same time it is transforming us. The great overcoming of narcissism is that love transforms me into the loved one.
And what can it transform me into? Well, this requires a ripening process. It has to become mature. In other words, you require an internal process and logic. So how can we come to this conclusion? Well, this also all has to do with an effective education. And I'm not going to be able to dwell on this issue, but I would like to say, however, that in effective education we have two elements that are only connected to affect. One of them is vulnerability. In other words, the biggest difficulty of integrating affects within our thoughts is that affect makes us vulnerable. So vulnerability has to be accepted, or it happens within an educational channel where I am supporting.
Clarísimo en los adolescentes. Se sienten demasiado.
Well, these students feel far too vulnerable.
Realmente no acaban de aprender a amar.
That's why they don't learn how to love. And then there's another thing which has to do with ecstasy. And you know that, well, these are the two outcomes of love, and which come from, well, from this has been explained perfectly well. That is, vulnerability and ecstasy are both united, because love has asked me that I get out of what makes me feel vulnerable, and by making me vulnerable, well, only by making myself vulnerable and by understanding things, am I able to achieve true ecstasy. So therefore we have to take one final step. Why did that Romeo and Juliet love fail? When Juliet understood the whole thing perfectly well, because they were on their own. And it's not good. Which married couple is on its own? That is, the biggest current disease is loneliness or solitude, and this affects the maturation of love. And perhaps the biggest difficulty of those marriages that don't know how to become mature is, well, they end up leading two parallel lives that turn out to be insufferable, not because they don't love each other, but they just don't know how to achieve maturity. But what kind of coaching do they need? They need to have this coaching that overcomes this germ of intimism that has left them with a romantic way of understanding language. It's never limited to two. It always reaches three people, and where fecundity represents an intrinsic characteristic of any love, so that they can build life. And at the same time, well, we have to understand that these are other families that have to provide the coaching or the support. So you cannot only expect us priests to do this, because it's the families that do so through a friendship and through proximity, and well, through what is the internal fecundity of family life. They can help other families to mature over time. So this is when people talk about the family crisis, they refer to a very specific kind of crisis that deals with the crisis of what is exactly called bourgeoisie family. In other words, family that was born after the Industrial Revolution, which is like an effective shelter. And it's a place where man can feel comfortable, and that is a family that is facing a crisis. However, the time has now come for the Christian family. So it's the most suitable moment for a family that finds in the maturity of its love a mission, which has to do with supporting others in this maturity, so the fruit is good at the end of the process.